your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. SAE Tomorrow Today just hit 300 episodes, and we're only just getting started. We're accelerating. This is where the future of mobility comes alive. Every week, we bring you inside the conversations that matter: autonomy, electrification, AI, cybersecurity, sustainable aviation, and much, much more. Each and every week, we sit down with the innovators redefining how we drive, fly, power, and connect, from zero-emission strategies and next-generation batteries to autonomous flight and AI-driven safety. These aren't predictions. They're the breakthroughs and decisions shaping what's next. Mobility's next chapter is unfolding fast. Stay ahead with us. Follow SAE Tomorrow Today on your favorite podcast platform. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Felix Leach and Nick Molden, co-authors of Critical Mass, the one thing you need to know about green cars. On today's episode, we'll take a deep dive into the environmental impact of car weight and the complexity of vehicle emissions. We hope you enjoy this episode. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Grayson.
Yeah, thanks very much.
It's great to have you gentlemen here. You recently published a fantastic book that opened my eyes and made me think a lot, called Critical Mass, and we're going to get into that today as we go through this conversation. But Felix, I want to kick things off. You're an expert in this field. What is the one thing we need to know about green cars?
Yeah, so the one thing we need to know about green cars is that the weight of a car is the best single measure of its environmental impact per unit of distance driven. It really is that simple.
So if that's the case, then why are global OEMs, not just American, why are all these global OEMs, it seems like, if you want to use the term bloat, they're getting heavier, they're getting bigger. There's a global trend here.
That's right. And I think it's because, in part, it's what we as consumers demand. I want my car to have the latest features. There's safety aspects as well. The more kind of crumple zones and other aspects you put into your car, the heavier it gets, but the safer it is. So I think there's a number of ways that we as users demand these heavier cars, but we're not really taking into proper consideration the consequences of this bloat, like you say.
Nick, are one of those major, if you want to use the term consequences, tire pollutions, brakes emissions, because the vehicle's heavier? It takes more mass to stop it. Is that one of the effects?
Oh, absolutely. And in a way, that's the one that is becoming the really sort of emblematic problem of the shift towards electric vehicles, because electric vehicles on average are sort of something that's sort of 700 pounds heavier than a typical combustion vehicle. And that's leading to a proportionate increase in tire pollutants. So just at the moment, we think we've cracked the problem of vehicle pollution by chopping off the tailpipe. Actually, it turns out that you've got this significant problem, which actually long predates electric vehicles, but it's just getting a lot worse with that heavier weight.
What sort of environmental impact, Nick, is there from the roads? Because the vehicles weigh heavier, so there's more wear and tear on the roads. Are you seeing any environmental impacts from the materials that are in the roads?
Yes, that too. Although that is there's very limited research on the amount of road wear. You see sources that quote 50-50, but truly science doesn't know how quickly the roads wear. What they do know is how much the tires are wearing and what is in the tires, and a huge range of chemicals, hundreds and hundreds of organic chemicals that are in tires. And what happens is these come off as tiny invisible particles. They don't gather at the side of the road. What they do is that they very quickly under sunlight break down and leach. They ooze into the water and into the soil. So just because you can't see these particles building up at the side of the road, it doesn't mean it isn't a major environmental problem. You're just seeing it literally downstream.
It was one of the goals or the mission of the book that you gentlemen wrote, was to raise this dialogue so policymakers can have a better, clearer understanding. Because as you know, Felix, there's debate. And I can't see it. It's not my backyard, not my problem. And then it just kind of goes on to the next person.
You know, I think we've got this policy debate, and we've got lots of tensions, right? You know, just to take UK, where I live as an example, 15 years ago, we were all told to buy diesel cars because they're lower CO2 emissions than gasoline vehicles. But then, of course, the NOx emissions in particular were just completely ignored. And suddenly the Dieselgate scandal happened, and, you know, everyone needs to buy a petrol gasoline car. Diesel cars are really polluting. Those fundamental scientific attributes haven't changed. It's just what we've cared about has changed. And I think by focusing on weight, what I want to try and steer the conversation towards, whether it's for policymakers or individuals, thinking about what car am I going to buy next, is that actually, of course, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, but there is something that you can hang on to that helps you make a decision like this without saying, do I worry about CO2? Do I worry about NOx? Do I worry about safety? Or do I even worry about price? Other things that consumers really worry about.
Felix, the weight issue, do you see that coming down from countries or regions? If you look at the European Union, for example, the vehicles tend to be smaller than the US. And if you look at Southeast Asia, the vehicles are smaller. Do you kind of see it coming down to a region by region basis of how weight comes into the factor?
Yes and no. I mean, you're right, of course, that, Japan, famous for its K cars, Southeast Asia, like you say. Europe historically has seen slightly smaller cars, perhaps because we've got older cities with narrower roads. But if you look at the data, every country in the world, cars are getting heavier. They're not all starting from the same baseline, but cars are getting heavier. And let me be clear, this isn't just talking about EVs, right? This is, gas cars are getting heavier. Every type of powertrain in a car, the vehicle around it is getting heavier. And so I think, we've got this push. And at the moment, I haven't yet seen people seriously putting the brakes on. There've been some talk in France. There's some looking at taxation of that. Some people beginning to tax cars based on weight for like how much you pay for parking. But there's not really been any country that's grappled with this issue seriously.
Yeah, so in fact, there's a hot debate in the Netherlands at the moment, who do have part of their tax regime based on weight, as to whether you should carve out electric vehicles from that policy. And I think one of the things that we show in the book is how it's possible to have a universal weight-based system that takes in vehicles, takes in cars of all shapes and sizes. So the error, a serious error, would be to carve out electric vehicles, because ultimately what we're trying to do is create a policy environment for a world where we are largely electrified in the future. If not, governments lose tens and tens of billions of dollars of tax revenue, which no Western government can afford to do at the moment. So this is not just an environmental question. It also is fiscally really relevant for governments today.
Felix, Nick brings up a great point about the Netherlands. If you want to use the term confusion in the market's fragmented. You have one group over here, one group over there, one group believes this, one group believes that. Why is there such this debate in the market, and how do you see that potentially changing and everybody kind of going down the same path potentially?
I think it's because everyone's confused, or maybe I should say, at least I'm confused. And I have some experience in this area. Like I was saying before, politicians' time has, changed on what we're told is good and bad. And people are always grasping for simple solutions, because no individual, whether it's me or anyone listening, can weigh up all of these different factors, whether it's simply about the environment or about wider considerations around owning and buying a vehicle. And so what we're trying to do is say, actually, there is something that you can hang on to here, and it's weight. And yeah, it's not perfect. We'll hold our hands up to that, but it is good enough. And that's the important thing, because it applies to all types of vehicle, whether it's a small city EV or a huge gas guzzler, Hummer or something like that. Ultimately, you can begin to kind of make some of these essential comparisons, and as a policymaker or consumer, make a decision yourself.
Nick, and that brings up a really good point. Consumers globally love big, heavy cars, and OEMs love selling them because their profit margins that are publicly documented are a lot larger than smaller cars. So with that in mind, how do you work to change the behavior?
Well, actually, behavior can be changed relatively quickly with the right incentives. And I'll put forward the example of what happened in the 1970s. 1970s, as you know, two oil crises. And what happened in a relatively short space of time is the fleet of vehicles got, including in the United States, or almost especially in the United States, got smaller and lighter, chasing fuel efficiency. The speed limits that were introduced in the 1970s were again, something consumers tolerated it because fuel efficiency and fuel cost became the overwhelming priority. So in a relatively small number of years, with the right incentives, in that case around fuel prices, the behavior of the producers and the consumers changed. And so there's absolutely no reason to believe that the behavior can't change again if the right economic incentives are provided. And what we're saying is, if you put the appropriate tax based on weight, you will create the incentive for people to downsize. That doesn't mean there'll still be people who buy pickups, but within the world of pickups, you go for the lightest one that meets your needs, not the biggest one with the pumped up suspension and all the extras. So what's the beauty of this system is that you don't have or don't need some supposedly wise government sitting in the middle telling people what cars they're allowed to buy. You still have people have free choice. They are just paying the right amount of tax reflecting the environmental damage and then let people make their own free choices.
You see it almost as a VAT tax?
Well, it is a purchase. It's not at the point of purchase. It's not a one-off at the point of purchase. Whether a VAT tax or a sales tax, this is a recurring annual charge because the environmental damage being created is an ongoing, every time you use it. And so when we convert this into a tax, what you do is you take the mass, which represents the rate of emissions and environmental damage, and you multiply it by the miles driven. And that's a really interesting point in the overall taxation, because actually, if you only drive a few thousand miles a year, it's probably okay for you to buy a bigger vehicle because your impact on the environment is small. But if you're a high miling person, actually what you choose really does matter. So it's weight times miles when you actually do the tax calculation.
I think it's also worth including that we're not suggesting raising taxes. Let's be crystal clear about this. We're just talking about how today we pay gas tax, petrol tax in the UK, and you normally pay some sort of annual fee for running your car, right? We're saying, let's get rid of those and replace it with this weight-based system. It's not for us to say how much cars should be taxed in general, and different countries tax more or less. I live in the UK, quite a high tax jurisdiction. The US is a lower tax jurisdiction. Our politicians kind of decide those rates, and if we don't like them, we vote them out, or try to at least. What we're saying is, let's take the sort of the amount of tax that we pay today for driving, whether that's through gas tax or an annual fee or whatever, and just move it to this new system. So this isn't about charging people more. It's just about changing how we do it, not least because as we move to EVs, gas tax is going to disappear, right? If you don't buy gas, you don't pay gas tax. And I suspect that politicians are going to want to fill those holes in their budgets somehow. And indeed, it's probably right that we pay some sort of per mile fee, because effectively that's what a gas tax is, right? It's a per mile fee. You just pay it when you put the gas in the car, not when you drive the mile. And so we're transforming the system into this new, we think, A, more environmentally appropriate way, and B, a way that is future-proof for the future world of EVs.
I'm in America, and there's a dirty word in America that starts with a P and ends with a K. It's called pork. And the politicians love stuffing it into bills. And when, there's a rainy day, there's a pile of cash over there, let's go get it and put it into this project. How are you going to, I'm giving the US perspective, not a European or UK perspective. How do you avoid that scenario where that money's allocated for, say, environmental? Oh, no. We got a budget shortfall here. How do you avoid that?
Well, it doesn't. It's up to the democratic population, actually, what they do with it. So we're not actually saying that the proceeds from this tax need to be hypothecated for environmental measures. It may be actually, it is better to recycle that money into the healthcare to... You could say, I'm not a politician, so I'm not, but you don't have to put it into building roads or mitigating environmental problems. But the problem of pork is actually a really good one in a wider sense. And we in Europe don't speak about it in that way, but it is essentially the same thing. The bigger picture of what we're talking about is moving through the period we've been in, where environmental regulation is about banning things and telling people how bad they are for doing X, Y, and Z. That sounds all lovely, but what it does require is you have government sitting in the middle deciding what the right thing to do is, and your policy is based on banning things. All that leads to is car manufacturers and others spending all their time lobbying the government to change the rules in an advantageous way for them, rather than actually making better, lower emitting, greener cars. What moving to a taxation-based system like this is, it takes away that ability, or seriously reduces that ability for manufacturers to influence in that way. So they will hopefully redirect their time to making better and cleaner cars, and puts it well back where it should be. So that interaction of the market with the politics of it really does matter. And I think the more we can endow people with choice and make this all very visible to end consumers democratically, rather than lots of secret deals happen behind the scenes, it is a better thing. So it does fit into a bigger picture of how we need to overhaul the way we regulate the environment, both in the US and in Europe.
Consumer choice is key. If the consumer can't make a choice, we can go through multiple history books and we can all point out when you ban something if the consumer doesn't have the choice. Felix, I just want to clarify here for the audience. When you talk about weight, does that go to battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, traditional ICE? Is that across the board, or are we only specifically talking about electric here?
No, so it's across the board. Now, of course, there are differences between vehicle categories, if I can put it that way, right? Clearly a pure internal combustion engine vehicle and a pure battery electric vehicle have different emissions characteristics and different environmental impacts. But I think the nice thing is with what we're proposing is that you can start to blend the system together as the transition to EVs happens. I think we're all quite confident that at some point, maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 50 years, the majority of vehicles in the fleet will be EV. It's going to happen a bit faster here in Europe. It's going to happen a bit slower in other parts of the world, but it is already happening. And our proposal can blend this in. And I think the key bit of our proposal is that you retain tax on fossil fuel. So if somebody comes along with an e-fuel or hydrogen, or, I don't know what the market is going to develop in the future. And it's good that I don't know that. We've got the innovation in the market to do that. But if you retain the tax on the fossil fuel and then have this weight-based tax on everything else, then you can start to get the parity, because you're taxing the bad, i.e. the fossil fuel, and then everything else is simply related to weight. And as we go into it in a lot of detail in the book, or everything else comes back to weight, whether it's these tire and brakes that we've been talking about already, the impact of infrastructure, safety, noise, all these other things all come back to weight.
And Nick, because you highlight something in the book, and I want to stay on this theme that Felix very kindly walked us into here. 83%, this blew my mind, 83% of regulated pollutants that remain problematic are strongly linked to the weight of the vehicle. That's a lot. Can you walk us through that, please?
Yeah, exactly. So, the book exhaustively looks at all the different pollutants, and that's traditional pollutants like you coming out of the tailpipe, but all the other things like how it can affect the infrastructure and the noise that it creates and safety, et cetera, et cetera. So we've gone through those and looked at which ones of those are weight dependent based on empirical evidence. And there are two groups of those which are subject to actual regulation at the moment and those that are not. And what it turns out with, essentially, we have solved most of the pollutants that are not weight dependent. If we were sitting here doing this 20 years ago, our system would not work, because some of the key pollutants, for example, the little black particles, the grey smoke that comes out of exhaust, that's not weight dependent largely. Also, the Dieselgate gas, the nitrogen oxides, the Volkswagen scandal, that's not weight dependent. But those now, and in a sense, thanks to Dieselgate, have now been solved. The amount of NOx coming out of a diesel exhaust is really very low. And there's no NOx coming out of gasoline worth worrying about either. Particles have been solved largely because of brilliant particle filters filtering out 99.999 probably percent now of particles. So we've just, because of the way it's evolved, we have chipped away at those non-weight dependent ones. And there are very few. One of the ones that does remain is a slightly arcane one called evaporative emissions. So actually, when your car is just sitting there, gas does actually escape a little bit from the tank. And that is not very strongly dependent on the weight of the vehicle. But everything else, tires, CO2, noise. Noise is a good one in that people don't realize most of the noise from a vehicle, when you're going above a certain fairly modest speed, comes from the tires, not the engine. So if you're going at, let's say, 40 miles an hour, it'll be the tires that are dominant. And as an experiment, you can stand by the side of the road and listen to EVs go by, and they they whoosh just as much, if not more, than an internal combustion engine. And finally, we shouldn't forget safety. Safety is a pollutant. It's an externality. It's an external impact. And it is quite clear from the research that the heavier the vehicle you are crashed into by, the more damage is caused. So it is so the damage is on the person into whom you crash, and that is strongly weight dependent. So one by one, we've been able to show, and yes, we are exploiting the evolution of how problems emerge and how problems are being solved. But it is nevertheless true today, 83% of the unresolved regulated ones are strongly weight dependent. And that's what gives the opportunity to introduce a system like this.
You bring up a valid issue that's not talked a lot in ground vehicles, talked a lot about in aerospace, is noise. And noise pollutions are a huge issue. Felix, I want to put all this together here. What is the Molden-Leach Conjecture? What is it?
Right. So like you say, drawing all this together, we've developed this sort of conjecture between the two of us. We called it the Molden-Leach Conjecture. We believe strongly enough in it that we've put our name on it. And it's very simple, that the environmental impact of a vehicle is equal to the vehicle mass, the mass of that vehicle, the weight colloquially, multiplied by the distance that it travels. And so you could put that together in a system where we can measure that kind of quite easily. Weight, you can't fix that, right? Any set of scales, a weighbridge, that's something that you can determine very, very simply. And the annual distance traveled, again, most cars, maybe after 2 or 3 years, are subject to periodic technical inspection where the odometer is read. This doesn't require fancy kit. It makes, no invasions of privacy. We can get all of these things really simply and in a really, really hard to falsify way, right? So in theory, and I think in practice, the cheating that we've seen in the past, goes away as well. When I stand on the scales in the morning, I find it very hard to falsify that myself. And the same is true of a vehicle, right? And so, it's a simple system. And we firmly believe that the Molden-Leach Conjecture can make a real difference to how we think about the environmental impact of our vehicles.
Nick, why is now the right time for the Molden-Leach?
The main reason is that governments are going to have to do something about the tax system of vehicles. And the longer we wait, the worse it'll get. And what do I mean by that? So it's got to be addressed because, as Felix mentioned earlier, with the shift to electric vehicles, if we do nothing, the amount of vehicle tax revenue will fall substantially over the next decade, 2 decades, and get close to zero. And that's a big fiscal hole. So the longer we wait, the bigger it will get. But there is also a political reason why it's important to do it soon, is while there are not very many electric vehicles on the road, it is important to get people used to the idea that electric vehicles need to be taxed. Because they do create environmental damage. They're not zero emission. They will need to be taxed. They will be used as a source of revenue. They'll have to be. And so introduce it now, frame people's expectations when they're starting to buy electric cars. If you try and introduce it when there are millions and millions of electric vehicle drivers on the road, then you'll have to overcome a big mental hurdle. The people will have bought these things thinking that they're low tax or tax free. So you want to get it into people's minds early that no, actually we'll have to. And there's one dead practical reason why electric vehicles will have to be taxed is because electric vehicles are so cheap to drive in most situations. The marginal cost of driving a mile in an electric vehicle is, let's say for the sake of argument, 3 cents. Whereas driving an internal combustion engine is maybe 20 cents, 15, 20 cents, depending on which state you're in. So it's dramatically less. So what will happen is people will start driving more miles just by economic incentives. They will also switch away from public transportation and other methods to the car because if you don't tax it, it's so close to being free that people will start over consuming it in a bad way. So you've got that really practical reason to make sure our cities don't get completely gummed up with congestion. which will be, really bad for the general welfare of inhabitants. You have to get that, and the sooner we get that system in place, the better. So you've got that bigger picture, and you've got the sheer dollars of revenue to fund roads and hospitals and things that is needed. So that's why we should not wait. And every month that we wait, the political hurdle for getting this right in the end will get greater.
Felix, I can't tell you, Nick brought up a good point. The last time I heard the word zero emission. Let's go back. I'm going to be old and hit the rewind button on the VCR, and let's go back 5 years. Let's be honest, that word was blasted everywhere. You couldn't open, you're in the UK and you got, my opinion, the world's best paper, the Financial Times. You couldn't open the FT without seeing the word zero emission. Here in America, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing zero emission. A lot changed with that. How is Felix, you're based in the UK, how is the UK thinking about electrification, thinking about it? Because I remember, this was going back to the FT, there was an article years ago in the FT that, I forget the percentage, that a lot of homes in the UK could not put on the electric kettle, and charge the car at the same time. Never forgot that. So how is the UK thinking about it?
Right. So I think we're moving beyond the phrase zero emission, I would say. It's still used, of course it is, but I think increasingly people are using the phrase zero tailpipe emission, which is, of course, accurate. So that's clearly to be commended, and EVs do, by virtue of not having a tailpipe, by definition, have zero tailpipe emissions. But, like any country, our transition to electric vehicles is gradual. Their sales are increasing. There's a great set of EVs you can buy now in the UK, but the infrastructure is not really keeping up, right? They're quite in most of the UK now. There's quite a lot of good charging at kind of rest stops on the highway and things like that. Home charging, it really depends on what sort of property you live in. If you're lucky enough to have a driveway, and you live maybe not in the center of a city, then yeah, home charging is a realistic option. If you live in a high rise or, on an area where you've got on-street parking, it's pretty hit and miss, to be honest. And so that kind of infrastructure development is still very much work in progress. And that's why I think for a while, we're going to see this diverse fleet of cars with people buying hybrids, plug-in hybrids, EVs, and our legislation allows for that, right? We do have an internal combustion engine ban coming up in 5 years' time, but plug-in hybrids are going to be allowed to be sold after that date, because I think there's a recognition that this kind of best solution for different people and different people's needs is going to be a different type of vehicle. And indeed, that's also true of the environment, right? On a life cycle basis, depending on how much you drive and how you charge and things, the equations sort of don't always give the same answer. So I think we're seeing the infrastructure is developing, but it's developing more slowly than I think anyone would like. And yeah, we'll get there.
Can I add to that? Felix mentioned the life cycle, and that's one of the pollutants that we cover in the book, which is looking at life cycle in the sense of what are the emissions embedded in making the vehicle in the first place, wherever it's made in the world. And so it's quite clear that no vehicle is zero emission. It cannot be. If it has mass and it's assembled and made of things, it's going to have some emissions embedded in that. What's particularly problematic about both the UK and Europe's approach to this at the moment, with their various net zero CO2 targets, is that because those are based upon the tailpipe, it's creating a terrible incentive to replace internal combustion engine vehicles made in Europe with electric vehicles made in China. Because on the European calculus, an electric vehicle made in China scores zero, like ideal, zero CO2 in the official calculations, even though there's a whole bunch of manufacturing emissions offshore, whereas a locally made internal combustion engine suffers those CO2 emissions are counting towards the calculus of the UK and Europe's national CO2 targets. So the governments in Europe have the incentive of essentially offshoring the manufacturing CO2, and is creating some very perverse incentives. And so the behaviour is badly aligned with the environmental reality.
I'm going to jump right. It makes no sense because when those vehicles are shipped to the UK, they come on a barge, they come on a boat, big. And when they come out of the ground in Australia, the minerals, then they go to China to be refined, and the vehicles manufactured and shipped to you. You have this whole trail of pollutants that go along with it. Why isn't that taken into account? It's just, I feel like a biddity boppity boop from Cinderella. Here we go. It's magically here. No, there's a whole thing that goes into this.
Well, so let me give the defense first. So if the European Commission will argue that they have got a program at the moment to work out a life cycle methodology that might well be incorporated in future regulation. Fine. That is some way off, and it's arguable whether that will ever be delivered because that is such a complicated challenge to do. But it is, and so it is still true right now, whatever the intention for the future, right now, which is when matters for the electric transition, it is true that there is this massive skewing of the scales towards electric vehicles, and that whether that was deliberate by design or just expedient because tailpipe emissions were relatively easy to measure, I probably wouldn't like to comment. But Felix, I don't know, you may prefer to comment rather than me on that.
I think, Nick, I just pick up on something you just said, which is there is another way out of this, which is to add more complexity. We could generate life cycle methodology. We could give every car a noise rating. We could change the safety ratings to take into account vehicles hit by other vehicles, as well as the current just safety of the occupants of the vehicle. There are ways out of this that generate more complexity. But my problem with that is I think it's already too complex, and I and consumers don't really understand it. And what we're saying is we need a different way out of this, right? We need something that is simple to understand, that people can make really easy decisions, right? Let me stress that our system's not about taking more tax. It's just about changing how we allocate the tax. And, I could decide, I know that this journey I'm going to take that is really essential is going to cost me 10 cents to make because I know how far it is and I know how much my car weighs, right? Or, it's raining, I could walk to the shops today, but that journey is going to cost me X. And suddenly that's much clearer, as opposed to now where the journey is effectively free. And then once a year I pay my car tax. And every time I go to the petrol pump, the gas pump, I pay tax, but I don't really know how much is tax versus how much is the cost of gas. It's all kind of hidden. So I think we just need to take away the complexity, right? There are ways out of this that are more complex, but the more complex you make something, the more I would argue it's prone to abuse, to bias, to lobbying. Let's take all that out. Let's make it simple.
And when you're shopping for your car, too, at the moment, if you're environmentally conscious, you flick through the brochure or look on the website or whatever to try and find the various emissions numbers, and then and what is a NOx anyway, that sort of thing. Whereas when you're choosing between your cars, just look up the weight. It's freely available, officially police number, and just within the vehicles that suit your purpose, then go for the lightest one. That would be a great incentive to create.
Felix, is that one of the reasons why you and Nick wrote Critical Mass, was to simplify it, to make it simpler to make a decision?
Yeah, and to make it understandable as well. I've grown really concerned that if people like me don't really understand all the complexities of this, then, the average person doesn't stand a chance. And of course, we're all responsible for this pollution by going about our daily lives. And I think the sort of one of the central theses of the book is that people want to do the right thing. Nobody's going out there simply to sort of screw the environment, right? That in general, we want to do the right thing. We're just not really sure how we're going to go about it. And so let's make it obvious to people how to do that, and myself included. Let's simplify. It makes it less prone to abuse, and it helps people. And that's really why we set out to write the book.
And you're based in the UK, Felix. You have beautiful villages in the countryside. You have small, narrow roads. You have very old roads. How is the UK, not just the government, but the whole country, thinking about the size and weight issue?
Right. And this is a really live issue. One thing that's been discussed is changing. So a lot of older bridges in the UK have a 2-ton weight limit, or maybe 3.5-ton weight limit. Some villages, it's a little bit higher than that. there's been a real push by some people saying EVs are heavier, so we need to raise the weight limits. You're like, well, hang on a second. Engineering doesn't really work that way. The weight limit's on the bridge, not because of what's driving over it, but because that's what's safe for that particular bridge or road, right? We need to have a different way of thinking about it. We can't just tell people not to use it. We can't spend money rebuilding every bridge in the UK. So let's just try and find different ways where we can just say to people, here's what you need to know. And I think that's how we need to go about it in the UK, because at the moment we don't know the way out of it.
If a politician stood up and acknowledging the presence of some environmental problem, and then someone piped up and said, right, the solution to that is to make everything bigger and heavier, it doesn't pass the smell test. And that's effectively what we're doing. We are taking a thing which has some problems, the vehicle, and the solution is apparently to make them bigger and heavier. In the context of roads where you've got millions of people on the road trying to go about their daily business, the answer intuitively is not make them bigger and heavier, and indeed more expensive at the moment. We're going in all those dimensions in the wrong way. We should be making things, to the extent that's possible, smaller, lighter, and cheaper. That's the better road to people being happier, being better off. At the moment, we're setting it on a road for people to be miserable.
Felix, 5-10 years from now, do you see anything changing? I ask you with the context of that because Nick alluded to this. People get dug in. and oh boy, we're nope, not us. We're not changing. What do you see changing 5-10 years from now?
I think the fundamental thing that will change is that governments will start to notice drops in revenue from gas tax. That is inevitable. As more people drive EVs, gas tax will drop. And so I think that is the incentive for governments to start to make the change. And we go into, probably mind-numbing detail in the book about how we can do a transition between one system and the other, relatively simply by phasing it in according to the proportion of EVs in the fleet. So in the UK, it's about 3-4% right now. If you make a 3-4% change, most people aren't going to really notice that, except at some of the extremes, right? And you then phase it in slowly. You're probably looking at phasing it in over 20 years as the fleet composition changes. And in doing that, I think you can affect the change. And that's what I hope to see changing, because like it or not, the fleet of cars is changing. It may not be EVs that does this. It may just be hybrids. But hybrids are way more fuel efficient than gas cars are, right? And suddenly the gas tax is dropping and the government's looking at that and going, well, hang on, we don't have enough money to fix our roads anymore. And consumers will notice that, right? Everybody hates potholes. And if the government says, well, we're getting less money to fix the potholes, then I think, a good politician can make the argument to make the change. And that's what I think we will see over the next 5 or 10 years, because it's going to have to change.
I can tell you here in the United States, the road tax is a hot topic that's debated. The people that buy the EVs don't want to pay it. And the individuals that build and maintain the roads want you to pay it. So it's going to come to a head at some point. When it is, I'm not going to get a prediction on that, but something is going to have to give there. Nick, what's next for the Molden-Leach Conjecture?
Yeah, so what next for the Molden-Leach Conjecture? Well, I think the important next step is to make it up into a simple, concrete policy proposal. So the book had to set out the empirical evidence for it to show why it works. But that isn't in the ideal digestible form for politicians. And there's also lots of detail to work through. So if we have the tax based on weight times the miles you've driven in a year, okay, what's to stop people then fiddling with their odometer to try and save tax? So there's lots of practical stuff to work through. And there will be inevitably some exceptions that are in the current system that we want to carry over. Apparently in the UK, there's an exception for people who run lighthouses. People who run lighthouses don't have to pay current vehicle duty. So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful little exceptions. And to have a fully worked up policy proposal, we need to work through those details. So that I think in the immediate next steps is what needs to be done. But then it's a question of making the case to the right people in a world of terrible political flux. I mean, there was major change in the UK government on Friday. The politicians turn over so fast. And so actually getting beneficial policy change when there's not a lot of stability in government is difficult, is a challenge. But that's that's not going to change anytime soon. And that's a challenge we've got to rise to through working this up and good evidence and persistence.
Felix, is simplicity, is that the goal at the end of the day, to get let's say a one-page digestible document that policymakers can understand, the public can understand and embrace? Is it, you're going to take this massive book and try and consolidate it down to a one-page simple doc? Is that where this is all going to end up?
Yeah, and we already have. We like to practice what we preach, Grayson. And so I've got my copy of the book here. The first thing you see in the book is a one-page summary of the whole book. Some people said, why are you giving it away for free at the start? Well, because, of course, you can't unpack all the detail in that. None of the evidence supporting it is on that one page, right? That's in the next 299 pages. But we can condense this down. Simplicity is key. And, if people take one thing away from this, the weight of a car is the best single measure of its environmental impact per unit of distance driven. That's it. That is the statement. That's all you need to know.
See, Felix is keeping it simple. Gentlemen, this has been a fascinating conversation. Felix, I love your closing lines here, but if you want to give something else, you're welcome. What would you like our listeners to take away with them?
The weight of the car is the best single measure of the environmental impact per unit distance driven. It's that simple.
Nick?
And this shows that every car, well, until at least we invent teleportation, all vehicles will have a mass. And so it shows that all vehicles do impact upon the environment. And for me, the key thing is people talk about net zero or zero emissions. It's incredibly misleading, because nothing has no impact. What we do with cars is we're weighing up an amazing social and economic good against some environmental bads. And really, the trick is to balance those in the best way for society. And that's why this isn't a very arcane piece of academic research. This is a really practical proposition to enable social improvement, economic improvement. So we keep cars, but we make them sustainable with a nice environment. And that's what we've always wanted to achieve. So that's where I would like to, the thing, if you take one thing away from this, that is it. This is the way to make cars sustainable with a pleasant environment.
I'll put it in very simple terms, staying on the simple team. Weight matters. Pay attention to weight. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is weight. Nick, Felix, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us, Grayson.
Be sure to join us next week for another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today Unplugged, where I'll share my thoughts and insights into markets and the future of mobility.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.